Hey, it's Sonia, and welcome to the Smarta Podcast. Hi, I am so super excited for today's episode because it's one that will get you closer to achieving your goals. And I just wanted to start off right by saying thank you for clicking on this episode and taking the time to come closer to achieving your ideal self. Today's episode is one that's particularly gonna make you laugh and hopefully make you learn things that you will incorporate into your everyday routine. You're gonna learn, no matter in what industry you're in or what interests you have, how to differentiate yourself from the crowd, how to silence the noise and bring out the signal to make you stand out. So by sticking around until the end of today's episode, you're going to find out a couple of things. Here they are: eccentric, electric, and eclectic. The 3 E's. There's also another one, the 3 B's: bed, brain, and bath. And the art of storytelling and the power of insight. You're going to find out about the fundamentals of storytelling and its significance in both the personal and professional lives. You're going to learn how interpreting data creatively can enhance your perspective and decision-making skills. Practical tips that you can incorporate into your everyday routine for young people and also for the ones that are more niche, particularly into the world of advertising and marketing, about how you can develop your creativity and observational abilities. And for the professionals or executives listening to this podcast, the concept of insight and its role in transforming brands and creating memorable campaigns. And in today's episode, I brought TEDx speaker Anthony Tasgal and bestselling author to help break it down for you. Anthony Tasgal has spent 15 years as an ad agency planner before setting up POV, a strategic brand consultancy. He is a training director for the CIM and a visiting lecturer at Buckingham, Nottingham, Trent, and Beijing Normal Universities. He's the author of the Insight book, the Storytelling book, the Storytelling Workbook, Incitations, and the Inspiratorium, all published by LID. And he's a lecturer, speaker, and a strategist whose main occupation is advertising and marketing. He specializes in storytelling, behavioral economics, and insights, and greatly enjoys etymology and comedy. And now here's how you can enhance your creativity and stand out from the crowd. Hi, Taz. So it's so good to have you on the podcast. How are you?
I'm good. I'm very, very, very good mood.
That's great to hear. All right. Well, I went ahead and already introduced you to our listeners, but I want to start off by saying I want to get to know you more as a person. And I want to know something about you that we wouldn't be able to find online on the internet. If you could go ahead and start off with that.
Okay, one thing that most people who know me, who work with me, or married to me, or related to me, I'm obsessed with comedy. So you probably will be able to find this online, and also you'll be able to find it in my books because there are comments and jokes in the books. But ever since I was young, I've always been interested in what comedy is and how it works and why, as human beings, we seem to think some things are funny and other things are not funny. And some cultures think this is funny, but not that funny. Mm-hmm. But also with my interest in sort of biology and evolutionary psychology, what is the role of humor? Even the best scientists don't really understand what the role of humor is. So I'm absolutely fascinated with humor. And if anyone ever wants to talk to me, ask me about comedy.
We'll for sure do. And I think having this quality of being funny is key to really anything. Tess, I'm 16 and it's about time I start thinking about university and about my applications and personal statements, which truthfully are all about the art of storytelling. And I want to start off if you could tell me more about the art of storytelling and the power of interpreting data, especially as you're the author of the Insight book and the Storytelling book.
How long have we got? I'll tell you what, I'll tell you a story. Okay, you wanted to know a bit more about me. So I'll tell you how I got interested in storytelling, and that will answer your question. So I used to work in advertising agencies as what's called an account planner, strategist. And I spent a lot of time writing presentations, seeing presentations, enduring presentations, and also helping to create brand communications. But before that, I was a classicist. I studied Latin, Greek, and ancient history. And even now, I'm completely obsessed with it. I was just saying before we came on, I've just come back from Budapest, and they had a fantastic Roman village there. And I spent a day there, absolutely as happy as you can imagine, reading Latin inscriptions and looking at the ancient sort of place called Aquincum, just outside Budapest. Anyway, so I was always interested in Rome and Greece, but also the stories, whether it was the Greek-Roman myths, whether it was the great heroes like Alexander the Great or Cicero or Caesar. I love those stories because they speak to us after 2,000 years about what it is to be human. So when I ended up in advertising, I would see all these terribly dull, boring presentations. I would read boring CVs. I would talk to students and they would have a very, very identical description of who they were. And I would say to them, make it more interesting, make it more powerful, make it more memorable. And how do you do that? You tell a story. So through having studied and read Greek, Roman history and stories, and then studied a bit myself about the theory of storytelling, I got interested in using it in my work, in my lecturing, writing books, as a way of saying, whether you're a brand, whether you're a 16-year-old thinking about your career, whether you're a 21-year-old who's finished at university and wants to find out what they want to do, you need to find a way of telling your own story which is memorable and impactful. And I mentioned before we came on, I lectured at a couple of universities. So I often find myself with a room full of 60, 80, 100 students. And an exercise that we sometimes do is we ask them to talk about the target audience for their brand. So in the UK, we have a big sort of cosmetics, pharmaceutical retail outlet called Boots. And it's near where I lecture. So they often talk about, okay, who is the consumer for Boots? And one day I remember there were about 60 or 70 people, all of whom had to present to us for 5 minutes. Now, can you imagine sitting and listening to 65-minute presentations?
I don't think I can quite.
Without alcohol. And after about 3 or 4 or 5 or 10, we're thinking, oh, they're all the same. They all sound the same. But there was one person who said, okay, this is the audience. She's 19. She is interested in how she looks. She has a boyfriend. She lives in Manchester. And she has a dog called Rabbit. And we went, what? Now, that was irrelevant to her presentation, but that was the one detail we remembered. And she told this story about this dog and why she called it. And that's the thing about if you can have an anecdote or a detail, you involve your audience, you make them feel something emotional, and it's much more likely to be memorable. Mm-hmm. So I think that's almost like the end of the story or end of the question that I think you asked me. But that's how I got interested in. That's how I talk about storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think you see this even as I was judging speeches for year sixes. There's always those key, very subtle things that differentiate people from being from going that extra mile, from making them stand out. Now, You're the best-selling author of the Insight book. Yet a lot of listeners, including myself before, I met you, might be unfamiliar with the concept of insight. And I want to know how we can enhance our creativity and learn tactics to help us and to help us see things differently, especially for young people?
It's a really, really good question, especially for, as you say, for younger people, because normally when I talk about insight, I'm talking to professionals,
executives
in the marketing or research or communication or branding world, which is the world I come from. And the issue there is what's called saliency, which comes from the Latin word, and we see it in Italian, salire, sauter in French, saltar in Spanish, to jump. How do you make something jump out, stand out, be different? So with communications, it's about how do you make your brand or your website or your communication stand out. But as I said in the previous answer, if you're a young person, you're trying to impress someone or go for a job, you're still trying to stand out. So for me, the link here is insight is about seeing things differently. As you said, it's the subtitle of the book. It's about being more creative. And any creative person will tell you that's their job. There's a great quote somewhere about art. The role of art is to encourage strangeness and violate convention.
Wow. Not
a bad definition, is it?
Not a bad at all, yeah.
And that's what we have to do. We have to be strange and weird and different. And that's what insight is. So insight is often taking the same thing, but seeing something new or making a new connection. And one of my favorite quotes, I come from an art background, artist sort of, and classics and literature, but I'm fascinated with science. And there's a famous, I don't know, hopefully some of your audience will know a bit about science fiction. They might have heard of Foundation series on Apple. They might have heard of iRobot, which was a film with Will Smith in. They were all written by a man called Isaac Asimov, who was a very famous science fiction writer and a practicing scientist. And he said this, and I think it's the best definition of insight I've ever seen. And he wasn't really talking about insight, but I think it is for me. He said, when scientists come up with a new discovery, they don't go, eureka, which Archimedes said in the bath. They say, that's funny. And I always say that, and whenever anyone says it, you tilt your head and your eyes go like that, because that's your brain going, oh, that's funny, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of it like that. I hadn't seen it that way before. And that, for me, is the most important thing about insight, not what it is, but how it feels. So whenever I'm talking to young people or students, I'll say, if you're talking about doing a presentation or thinking about a project for your brand, or you're trying to write your CV, or the thing you want to create is a feeling. That's funny. I hadn't thought of it like that before. I hadn't seen someone who's described themselves that way before. So that's for me where insight comes in terms of thinking about yourself or thinking about how to present yourself in an original and distinctive way.
I'm making down some mental notes, and I'm going to go ahead right after this podcast. Try it out. Yeah, I think that's a very, very good way of, an easy actually way of, that you can implement it into your everyday life, no matter your age. But while you were explaining, I kept thinking, why insight? Why did you dedicate a whole book for insights? I think it's...
Again, I think it's really for my sort of professional area. And again, if anyone who's listening to this is interested in going into marketing or communications or branding, hopefully please do, because I think it's a great area to work in. But it's become a bit of a buzzword. Clients are saying, give me insight, make my brand more distinctive. It might be that their brand or their market is declining, or there's a new competitor who's come in. So they will say to their agency, give us insight, do something which changes the way that people see the brand. So in the book, I have a whole section about brands that have done that have created insight, which has completely changed the brand. So again, your listeners may remember an ad from a few years ago for Sonia Bravia, where they had all the balls coming down the streets in San Francisco. Again, if you haven't seen it, anyone, look it up. It's beautiful.
I know it is.
Yeah. So the insight there was, we don't want to show another ad with a television and lots of technical definitions and OLED and ULED. We don't have to show a couple sitting in their room staring at a television. Let's do something different. Let's talk about color. Let's just talk about how brilliant and beautiful the color is. Don't worry about all the conventions. Don't show a person, don't show television, don't do technical jargon. So the insight there was, if you want to stand out, just go for something which is going to break the rules and that really creates an emotional response. And it was one of the most successful campaigns to introduce sort of an electronic product. And again, all those examples of insight in the book, and as well as the theory, just hopefully give you a sense of, okay, I can see why they did that, because it made the brand famous. It created something really original, as well as being true to the product and making the product sell. So for me, that's the perfect commercial application of insight.
Yeah. And I think, especially for that advert with Sony, it's something so atypical. You remember it regardless of whether you were interested on the topic or not. It just sticks with you. And then regardless, again, of what topic it is, you can take it and say, oh, today I have this project, say for a school, or this presentation for university, or even work. Let's look at it in a different perspective.
Yeah.
And so insight is about connecting information rather than collecting it, and how you can make those key things more special. So my question for you, Tas, now is, how can young people start developing this skill in their own lives?
Again, that's a really good question. By the way, I think you might have quoted something I say in the book, that information is to be collected, but insight is to be connected. So what I say to young people is, I think the best thing you can do is to keep your eyes and ears open. Read as much. Go to the cinema. Do things that you probably wouldn't normally do. So again, one of the things, I don't think it gets in my bio now anymore. I used to be a director of a trust in London, near where I live, in North London, of a cinema, an independent art cinema. And I'm obsessed with movies as well as comedy and whatever. So I go to usually 50, 60 films a year. And I think it's important that for young people that you go to an art gallery, you go to museums, you read books, because that's the way your brain, your unconscious system one. My next book, which is coming out in a month, by the way, is about behavior. So system one is your unconscious, and your unconscious is constantly taking these things in and making these new connections. And again, that's what creative people and scientists talk about. They talk about, you're thinking about something, you can't solve it. And then suddenly, it's called the 3 Bs, by the way, bed, bath, and bus.
Bed, bath, and bus.
We've all been in that situation. You're trying to crack a problem. You go to bed, you wake up in the morning suddenly, or you're in the bath like Archimedes, and you step in the bath and you shout, Eureka! Or you're stepping on a bus and suddenly, right, that's... So my solution, my suggestion for young people is keep your well of ideas full, because you never know. Your brain unconsciously will see new patterns and make new connections. And whether you like it or not, or you know it or not, that is the path to insight. So that's my main recommendation to young people, is to keep your eyes and ears open and flood your unconscious with lots of different thoughts and ideas.
Yeah, 100%. Especially me right now, as I'm discovering myself, I find a new passion every month, and then I go, well, let's put my 100% in this, see if it works or not. And, maybe in 2 years, I'm not as passionate, then I move on to a different topic. But it's
also the key thing is, you don't have to force it. Even if you started playing the guitar or learning French, it doesn't matter, because it's there unconsciously. Even if you stop learning it, your brain is still thinking, okay, that reminds me of a word in French. It's all there in your unconscious. Your unconscious is so much more powerful in terms of creating these insights and new ideas.
Exactly.
So just keep that going.
So I think keep your base interests on a lot of different topics, be exposed to everything out there, to sum up on what you said. And I actually want to bring it back to the insight book, where you talk about finding insights that can transform brands. And I want to scale it down to particularly students interested in studying or which are currently working in advertising, and explain how you can grasp the perfect insight that will be the route to a successful and memorable campaign.
That is a very big and difficult question.
Quick, like, you're on the timer.
Yeah, it's a bit like saying, define great art. But the answer I usually give to that, though, is try and understand, when you see a piece of communication, a website or a brand name or a logo, try and understand why does it look like that? Because the three key things, and again, a free tutorial for anyone listening who wants to go into advertising.
Goodies.
Question one, who is your target audience? The most important, who are they? Because they're not you, and you have to put yourself in their head or in their shoes. So think what it is that they want. The second question, what do they currently think or do? Mm-hmm. The third question is, what would you like them to currently think or do? Now, when you look at a piece of advertising, whether it's Sony Bravia, whether it's Cadbury's chocolate, which I also talk about cream eggs in the book, whether it's about the spice, Old Spice, whatever it is, try it as a student and imagine not what you think about it, whether you like it or not. That's not the point. Do you think it's succeeding against that audience? Mm-hmm. So that's whenever I work with students, I will say, okay, I'm going to give you this. I'm going to show you a website or a brand or a logo. And I want you to answer those questions. And then we can decide whether we think it's successful. So you're always trying to keep a professional eye, not just a personal eye. Because often people say to me, oh, I didn't like that TV ad, mm-hmm. or I don't like Apple. And I said, well, that's not the point. It may not be aimed at you. Mm-hmm. If it's not aimed at you, you've got to think about who it is aimed at. Mm-hmm. So it's really important to bear those questions in mind.
Especially for employees, it's always the brand's values, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the things, again, I talk about in the Storytelling book and the Storytelling Workbook is the importance of brand personality and values. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you another of my big statements, right? Which is, over the years, I've come to this sort of learn this truth. That in communication, I don't know how many of your listeners are thinking of going into content managers or content creators. Mm-hmm. And we have a saying in English, this is tongue-in-cheek, a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I don't like the word content. I always say to people, stop calling it content and call it stuff.
Why?
Because stuff is what it is. Content isn't necessarily better because you call it content. Mm-hmm. It's stuff. It can be good stuff. It can be bad stuff. It can be interesting stuff. It can be dull stuff. But calling it content doesn't make it work. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people who work in content, I'm producing content. Yeah, but is it really motivating? Is it really relevant? Mm-hmm. So the statement that I've come up with now over the years is we spend way too much time thinking about content, what we say, but we don't spend anything like the amount of time we should on form, which is how we say it.
Wow. That's one thing to remember. I mean, I
think it's a really big point because, as I say, people like content. What content do I create? Mm-hmm. Yeah, but how? How do you portray that content? So again, if you're talking to 16-year-olds about writing a presentation or doing their CV, the content is, this is who I am and this is what but how? How do you deliver that form in a way that people will go, oh, that's funny, or that person's interesting, I really want to talk to them? And that's the important thing. And I think I want to swing the pendulum a bit away from what we say and far more to how we say it. And again, that's where storytelling comes. Because storytelling is about how you turn that content into something that is going to be memorable.
In the same way with literature, I think, there's so many different ways to structure a sentence, so many different words you can use. What's the one sentence? What's the one word that you can use that makes the reader go, step back and go, whoa.
Yeah. And again, I've written in a lot of the books about jargon. Mm-hmm. I did a TEDx talk, which is on YouTube. Your listeners can find it.
I've watched it. It's very good. I suggest you do too.
Thank you. An easy plug. Mm-hmm. But in there, I talk about jargon, and I use the expression, jargon is the thief of meaning. Mm-hmm. Because in any communication, meaning is important. Again, whether you're creating a website or piece of communication for a brand, whether you're thinking about writing something for a job, it has to mean something. And unfortunately, even on LinkedIn, so a lot of people I know, my students, colleagues on LinkedIn, they write this terribly boring description about, I'm strategizing solutions for top end. Oh, don't write that. Write something that's more human and more meaningful. So you're absolutely right. One of the things that when I do workshops or training, I just did one with a client in the States. We spent a whole day trying to get rid of as much jargon as possible. And every client I work with says the same. Oh, I know we have a lot. We really want to get rid of it, but we can't. And yes, you can. You can. Not maybe 100% of it, but you can get rid of 80 to 90% of it and replace it with something meaningful, something that has an emotion attached to it. And it will be far more powerful, whether it's internal communications, external communications, your LinkedIn definition, your CV. Try and stop using the jargon, if only because everyone else will be using it. So you'll be saying the same as them. Try and find the words that really sum up who you are or what you want to be in a way that is memorable and distinctive.
And now with this trend of social media booming, I'm going to direct your attention to social media now. Yeah. You talked about content creation and about content and communication. Do you think technology has made it easier or harder to find genuine insights, especially with the abundance of data available today?
Again, I get asked this question a lot because years ago, I still do lots of conferences, and often I was asked to go on a conference where they were talking about AI or machine learning, and I would be the token heretic. And I would say, we have big data now, but big data is not enough. Data isn't insight. Data is just like the raw material. What you do with it. And I'm not sure that because we've got way more data than we've ever had, that we've got better insight. Because as I say in the book, there are certain qualities that you need to turn data into insight. Just producing the data is not enough. So again, maybe some of the people listening think, I want to be in data, I want to be in coding. Great, please do. But if you want to be in insight, you've got to have that plus these creative skills, these skills about empathy and emotion. So I'm not convinced that we've got more insight and better insight than we ever did. We certainly have more data. But the trouble is, the more data we have, another expression I use a lot is the signal-noise ratio. So again, it's an engineering term, but it works really well in the way that I talk about it. So in any communication, you're trying to raise the signal and reduce the noise. Whether it's a presentation, a CV, doesn't matter, anything. And the trouble is, data is noise. Insight is signal. So it's still everyone's task to raise the insight, the signal, and take out as much noise as possible. And that is not easy. That is not easy. And again, I work with professionals who've been working for 10 or 20 or 30 years who still find that really difficult to do.
I mean, listening to you talk now, I was thinking, if we're talking about social media, I think our attention spans have decreased so much. Now, the first thing that we do when we click on a profile is look at the bio, say on LinkedIn rather than any other social media, since it's more formal. Okay, you are a coder, like you said. Maybe someone wants to be a coder. But what differentiates you from all the other people doing the same job as you do? What is that one thing that is unique that you do that the others don't, you know? So I think, yeah, that's 100% how we can use the signal and the insights to lead us closer to success. And now that you've talked both about storytelling and about insight, I want to ask you, Tas, how are storytelling and insight connected for you, especially in marketing and branding for the young professionals?
Yeah. I'll give you two answers. One is about actually why you need to tell a story for an insight. And then if I remember, I'll come back to why storytelling is so useful anyway. So just the first point is I always separate two things of insight. One is finding the insight. So realizing that it's all about color, it's not really about the jargon, or realizing that with cream egg, it's about how people play with their chocolate. It's not just about they play with it as almost like a toy. So the first thing is finding the insight, but the second thing is communicating it. Because again, from all my many centuries of working in advertising and marketing, often I'll find people who say, I've got this great insight, but no one listened to me. I took it to the board, but they didn't listen to me. Why? Well, because you didn't communicate it properly. So linking to my second point, the reason I think for young people, and I'll say this now before I forget, Sonia, that I think it should be taught in schools. I think communication skills, whether you call it storytelling or presentation, should 100%. Be taught in schools. Not PowerPoint, just how you use PowerPoint, which is another. How do you communicate? And also, how do you persuade? Because
100%.
They're very similar. I have a saying, you're never presenting, you're always persuading. Because again, going back to my classical background, this used to be called in Greek times rhetoric. So if you look at Aristotle in ancient Greece or Cicero later, they talked about rhetoric. And a lot of what I train on is rhetoric. But I realized when I was starting out, if I tell people to come to a day on rhetoric, no one would come. So I call it storytelling. Okay. But it's basically the art of persuasion. And I think it's really essential for young people. Firstly, in terms of how they present for jobs, in education, wherever it might be, but also so that they know when other people are trying to persuade them. If they look at governments or they look at local authorities or brands, it's really important that we defend ourselves against the sort of way that communication is trying to persuade us. So and I've talked to a couple of councils in the UK and even close to a government about suggesting that is put onto the curriculum for young people. Persuasion, presentation, storytelling, whatever you call it, because I think that is a huge skill. And often again, my daughter, she went to university in the UK. Well, all my kids did. And they ended up doing these PowerPoints. She's not here, so I can say that. They were terrible. And she knew they were, but that's how they were told to do them. Lots and lots of bullet points, lots of words, and everyone knows they're terrible, but that's the way, it's not even taught, it's just the way it's sort of people just do that. So a lot of what I do is to say to people, don't do that. I have nothing against PowerPoint, but you can use it in a way which is simpler, more emotional, more visual, and more moving.
100%. If you talked about storytelling, I want you to tell me about a time that you discovered a powerful insight that changed your perspective or your approach in your workflow.
I'll give you one example, and again, I think it's in the book. We have a broadcaster in the UK called Channel 4, and they are one of the youngest channels in the UK. I think it began in the 1980s. And they're known as being a bit controversial, a little bit edgy, a little bit different. And I was doing a talk at a conference a few years ago. And before I went on, I think she was the head of marketing at this channel, Channel 4, came on. And she said, this is our brand, this is our mission, our values. And she said, it comes down to one word. And that word is mischief. which is a very particular English word. It may be if English is not your first language, you won't understand it, but it means slightly naughty. Not bad or evil, but just slightly naughty, like children. So if they do something that's mischievous, you don't get angry with them. You just say, well, that was a bit naughty, you shouldn't. And I thought, what a brilliant word that is. It's such an absolutely accurate definition of that brand. And that reminded me of the power of one really good word, or the understanding of personality or values. And I'll give you another example, which I can't remember. I don't think it's in this book. We have in London a fantastic venue called the Royal Albert Hall. And I did some work for them a few years ago. It was their 150th anniversary.
Wow.
In 2021. They were built in 1870 by Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. And it's a fantastic, beautiful round circle.
Sure.
Everyone who's been there, everyone has played. Jimi Hendrix was there. Winston Churchill spoke there. We have all sorts of... And it was a fantastic job for me. I helped them tell their story for their anniversary. And you'll see where this is going in a minute. Okay. So they asked me to interview. I interviewed the council. I interviewed visitors. I interviewed people that performed there, like Cirque du Soleil and some of the managers and bands. And they asked me to come up with a story to help celebrate their 150th anniversary. And some of them said, oh, give us a slogan or give us a line. And we came up with some lines, but they weren't that memorable. But I put a slide up and I said, look, okay, I've come up with a word cloud. All the different words, the feelings that people described about the Royal Albert Hall. And a word cloud with lots of words, some big and some whatever. But then I said, okay, what I've done is I've just reduced it to 3 words. Everyone, these are things that everyone had said to me, and I've concentrated into 3 words. The first one was eclectic, which means just diverse. It was very varied. As I've said, they've had speeches, political rallies, tennis, something called chess boxing. Again, look it up. I'm not making it up. Chess boxing, where you have a round of boxing and then you play chess. Then you have another round of boxing. Trust me, look it up. So eclectic means very varied. And the second word was eccentric, because it has that slightly quirky English Britishness. They used to have parties where people would come to the party in carriages pulled by zebras.
Wow. That I did not know.
Not many people know that, Sonia, don't worry. And the third word I put up was when I spoke to people that performed there, like Eric Clapton, whatever, they would describe it as electric. It has this amazing sort of atmosphere. So I put these 3 words on the slide. Eclectic, eccentric, electric. And everyone went, yes, that's it. That's what we want.
That's the thing.
That's the thing. We don't want a boring slogan. Those words. And the chairman or the CEO actually went on television and said, okay, this is how we define these 3. And I went, oh, good, those are my words. So that was the point. I realized that sometimes these values, if they're meaningful, they can be not only insightful, but they can change a culture. And I was expecting them to go with something very boring and bland. Even the people at the top of the Royal Albert Hall said, no, that is who we are. That's what we want to talk about. That's how we want to describe our values. So from that time and before with Channel 4, I've always, again, going back to my content point, always said, let's not worry about getting some boring slogan. Let's come up with some meaningful words. A form, because that's something that a company or a brand or an organization can rally around. So that would be one of my examples.
And what you did was, from all of this noise, pick out that insight and made it the signal, the thing that...
Exactly. And often clients don't know that that's what they want. Often they don't express it. But what they actually want is, we have all this noise. We have consumer data, we have tracking data, we have online data. But what do we do with it? What's the signal? So
what's the one thing that we pick?
What's the one thing, or what's the one feeling? So often what I'm doing is saying to them, okay, how can we find this so that we can make order out of chaos, which is another way of perhaps putting it.
It's a very nice way of explaining it. Tess, I want to ask you, what advice would you give to teenagers who are interested in pursuing a career in marketing, advertising, or storytelling?
Some of it I mentioned already, which is read and watch TV, watch film, whatever. But one thing I would very specifically recommend, and it's really easy, if you like brands, if you're interested in Nike or Apple or any clothing brand, and you're interested in why they are the way they are, why is there a bite out of the Apple logo? Why is it called Nike, named after the Greek goddess of victory, as I'm sure you know? If you find just that's part of it, okay, find out more. Dig deeper into these brands. But one of the things I do with my students on the advertising course is I set them homework and I say, go out and look at 3 pieces of advertising or websites. Doesn't matter. Just every week, go look at 3. And answer those questions that I mentioned before. Who are they aimed at? What do those people think now? And what does this advertising or website want them to do? And it's a word I haven't used yet, strategic. Again, as a planner, that's my job to be. That's what you're doing. You're looking at strategy. So when I'm working with students and they'll say, can I get a job or can I get an interview at a big agency like Ogilvy? I'll say yes, but you've got to go in with that mindset. You've got to go in with a strategic mindset. I've looked at these brands. I've got these ideas about perhaps what they're doing that they could do differently, or they could talk to a different audience, or they could change the way the brand is positioned. And all you really have to do, as I say, is just swim in that pool, brands and advertising. And if you like that, it will be easy. And if you don't like that, maybe, it's not for you. But I find it absolutely fascinating because it's about psychology. It's about how people work and how you influence people. Lots of people, my daughter did psychology at university. Lots of people who are interested in psychology often move into marketing or research because it's an application. Psychology. How do you get people to choose a particular thing or make a particular decision or go for one brand rather than another? And if you're interested in that, you'll know very quickly, I think, if advertising or marketing or even market research is for you.
Tess, you've talked about exploring a wide range of subjects and now how to find what to do when you want to persuade this career. But I want to know if you have any tips that you'd like to share on how young people can improve their creativity and their ability to notice things in their everyday lives.
Yeah, there's a quote at the end of the Insight book, again, from an author, from an American writer called Saul Bellow. And I came across this when I was researching the book. He says in one of his stories, this particular character was a first-class noticer. And I thought that's a lovely expression. And I think that's I'm not sure how you become that, but I think you can think about, notice, be on the lookout for things that you think are interesting or different. And as I've said, many times, read widely, go to see films, go to art galleries, go to museums, do things which are part of the zeitgeist. And if you're doing that, as I say, these connections sort of will happen. I think a lot of education systems, and obviously I'm from the UK, they focus young people very early on. So I think if you're from that sort of educational system, make sure that outside of that, you're still looking at other things. So if you're doing arts, read up on sciences. Or if you're doing maths or physics and chemistry, go and read some novels or go to art galleries. Try and balance those two things together. Because there was a man, a famous British writer called C.P. Snow, and he talked about the two cultures. And it was about 100 years ago, but it's still prevalent. He said, we tend to divide people into the arts or the sciences. There's like a war between the two of them. And as long as there is a war, we're not going to progress. We have to blend the two together. So even if you work in data and coding, you've still got to, as I say, be creative and look for insight. And even if you are creative, and I work with a lot of creative people, it's really good as well still to understand psychology. And so the more we can get people to sort of the Venn diagram between arts and science and whatever, I think the more likely we are to get people who are going to be qualified in the sort of jobs that there will be in the future.
100%. Yeah. And now I want to go as a last advice or a message for the listeners out there. What message would you like to leave our teenage audience about the power of insight and storytelling in their lives and future goals?
I tell you what, I haven't mentioned it yet, but I have another expression that I use a lot.
Let's hear it.
So again, I think I can't remember which book I mentioned it in first. Insight, I talk about serendipity. A lot of insight is by accident. So many discoveries were by accident. So a few years ago, I was writing a speech for a client, and I was talking about the brain and talking about attention span, which is obviously very important. But anyone who's listening, if you look at your keyboard, you'll see the letters N and M are next to each other. So I accidentally typed attention spam with an M. And then I went, oh, that's funny. That's quite a nice expression. Now, I use it all the time. Your goal in anything, whether it's writing a presentation, whether it's, again, doing your CV, writing something for LinkedIn, your goal is to get through attention span. Because the way our brains work, 90% gets filtered out. It goes into what I now call attention span. So anything you're doing, again, and I write books, I do articles, I realize that is my goal. People are very busy. They've got 100 things to worry about. If you're talking to somebody about a job, they've got 100 people to see. If you're talking to your lecturer, as I mentioned, I'm going to see 60, 70 people saying this. How do you cut through attention span? So that's become my main sort of mantra. Whatever it is you're saying or doing. And again, often if you're meeting someone, the same thing, even going on a date, David, Tinder people, how do you make yourself look different and interesting from everyone else? It's stand
out from the crowd.
Stand out from the crowd, saliency. So those two words I often say, if you remember attention span, and just say that 90% of what you say or do, not because it's not good, but just because how our brains work, 90% of what you say or write will get filtered out. So how do you get to, as we said before, how do you get to the signal? Whatever it is, whether it's some words like eccentric, eclectic, whether it's about mischief, whether it's about finding something that you've done that no one else has done, a particular detail, that's what you should always be looking for, and try to avoid falling into the trap of sounding like everyone else. That would be, I think, at the end of the day, my main advice.
For sure. And if you keep yourself open to a lot of these topics and a lot of these subjects, then you could couch yourself from realizing, oh, I've turned myself into a routine. Let's go back and spot the signal and take action. I 100% agree. I just thought of a student of mine, funnily enough, who contacted me yesterday, just reminded me. And I taught her 5-6 years ago, I think now. And I saw her LinkedIn profile. And I thought, what? Really, really boring. But I know her. She speaks 5 languages. She's, like me, a great fan of films. Let's hope she's not listening to the podcast. Yeah, that's true. And she has all sorts of interests. And none of that was in her link. And I said to her, I wrote back and said, look, you make yourself sound like everyone else, but you're not. I know you're not, because you know her. And yeah, so but she said, I was frightened. No, don't be frightened. The worst thing you can do is say what is going to be ignored. And that's what you've written. You've written something very, I see the big picture. I'm interested in creative. No, don't say. Give examples. What is it that you've seen or written or got you? That's what we need to get, I think, young people to do more of. Even if it may sound boastful to you, or, you know, maybe I'm a modest person. And whenever someone tells me to introduce myself, I skip a lot of stuff because I feel like because I'm that person that did everything that I know about. If I share them, I feel as though I'm repeating myself, or I may come off as arrogant, but actually it's those irrelevant things sometimes that take you the extra mile from the crowd. So I 100% agree. Wow. I think I'll actually go ahead and replay this episode whenever I feel like I'm sluggish in a typical weekend. So thank you, Tas. I think this episode was one of a kind. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for being on this podcast. And I hope you have a great day. So
thank you very much. And good luck with everything as well, Sonia.
Likewise. Wow. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Smarta Podcast. Thank you, Tas, once again. And thank you for listening to this episode, for dedicating the time to building a better life. I hope you found our conversation with Anthony Tasgal as insightful and inspiring as I did. We explored the art of storytelling, the power of interpreting data, and practical ways to enhance creativity and uncover genuine insights. I hope you've laughed and learned some key takeaways that you're going to incorporate into your day-to-day routine. Remember, storytelling and insight are not just skills. They are tools that can transform your perspective and open up new possibilities in both your personal and your professional life. Whether you're a student, aspiring marketeer, or just someone eager to see the world differently, or applying to that job, or turning in your personal statement to your university, these concepts are invaluable. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and family. Leave a review, as your feedback is what helps us continue bringing you more amazing content with amazing guests. And if you want to follow Anthony Tasgal, make sure to follow him on LinkedIn. And also, do consider watching Anthony Tasgal's TEDx speech, which is a quick 15-minute on why stories make us care when numbers don't. Most importantly now, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen to something that will inspire you. Remember, one step a day will lead you closer to your ideal life. And if no one tells you today, I believe in you. Till next time, bye-bye.